I never did believe myself in this ministry deal anyway. I've bombed out every time I've had an opportunity. There's one thing I can do, and it's fish, and I'm going back. And he was the leader, of course. And so all the other 6 guys, like a bunch of rubber ducks, came down the same hillside and said, we're going too. So they all waddled down and got in a boat. Peter was the leader. That's the whole point. God wanted to use him. What happened in verse 3? They entered into the boat, the Greek says, which may indicate they went back and picked up Peter's own boat. He was going back to his old profession, and they were all going with him. They were all his fishing buddies. But there was one thing they couldn't do, was fish, because the Lord had rerouted every fish in the Sea of Galilee so they couldn't catch him, to get his point across. So they fished all night and caught nothing. The Lord appeared in the morning, had a confrontation with Peter, checked out his love, and we'll get to that text later. And then when Peter told him 3 times he loved him, he comes back with this in verse 18. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself and walkest where thou wouldest. Now, just stop for a minute. Peter, you've pretty much had it your own way. You called the shots, put on your own belt, and went where you wanted to go. Girding up yourself was a picture of preparation for a journey. Whenever you wanted to do what you wanted to do, you did it. But when you shall be old, that's going to change. You will stretch forth your hands, and that very phrase is used in extra-biblical literature to speak of a crucifixion. You're going to stretch forth your hands. Somebody else is going to gird you and take you where you don't want to go. Verse 19, watch it now. This spoke he, signifying by what death he should, here it comes, glorify God. Now notice this. Peter would come to the point in his life where he would glorify God by dying. How? Because he would be willing to pay any price before he would deny the will of God, even death. Now that was news to Peter, because every other time he'd faced death, he reneged on his testimony. On one occasion, when they confronted him with the fact that he was a follower of Jesus Christ, he cursed and took God's name in vain and swore that he was not, and made an oath that he never kept. So you see, this is news to Peter. But what the Lord is saying is, Peter, there's going to come a day when you will die for me, and in dying glorify me. Why? Because that will be my will, and you will be content to die for my sake. That's the way it was with Paul. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I live unto the Lord. If I die unto the Lord. So whether I live or die, I'm the Lord's. What's the difference? I'm the Lord's. You see, to aim my life at the glory of God, now that I'm a Christian, to focus on doing whatever I do, whether it's eating or drinking, to the glory of God, means that if it has to be death for His sake, let it be. Let it be. I think of the tremendous story of the missionaries throughout the history of Christian missions, story after story after story, becoming one great composite story of people willing to die for Christ. I think of Hebrews chapter 11, the heroes of the faith who are listed there, who died in the great anticipation of glory and resurrection, of whom the world was not worthy. There was no price too high for them. In fact, in Isaiah 24:15, Isaiah cries to the remnant and says, glorify God in the fires. I think of Latimer and Ridley, who were burned at the stake for their faith, singing praises to Jesus Christ. I think of Savonarola, the great preacher in Italy, who had preached the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the system took him and burned him at the stake. Again and again through history, there have been those willing to do anything for the cause of Christ. I always go back to the story of John Peyton, that great missionary who went to the New Hebrides. He graduated from school and he was sent to the New Hebrides with his wife, and there were only man-eating cannibals there, and they landed on that little place, they had to row a dinghy because the ship went by, didn't even go to the shore, and they rowed to shore, didn't speak the language, didn't know anybody. All they knew was people had come there and never returned. They had become somebody's lunch. And so they got on the shore. It's pretty tough, you know, to get on the shore of a place inhabited by cannibals whose language you don't speak and figure out how you start, right? I mean, you don't put a little sign that says Sunday school class Sunday at 9:30, we welcome you all. That isn't really the way you do. What do? You don't know the language, you don't know the people, and your threat of life hangs over your head. I remember reading in a particular book something of the story of that, and later on the chief of the tribe in that area was saved, and he came to John Peyton, and he said to him, Mr. Peyton, I want to ask you a question. He says, in those early months that you were here, he says, who was the army that girded your place of dwelling every night and protected you? God's holy angels apparently even became manifest in that protecting time. But Peyton stayed there. After a few weeks, his wife gave birth to a baby. The baby died. A few days later, she died. He slept on their graves for 3 or 4 nights to keep the natives from digging them up and eating them. He stayed there alone, and he stayed there for 35 years. He says in his biography that at the end of those 35 years, I don't know of one native that hasn't made at least a profession of faith in Jesus Christ. He went there with all the great hopes. The only thing he ever loved really in the world was his wife, and then the cherished baby. He had to sleep on their graves, and all alone he stayed. But God used him because he was content to do God's will no matter what it cost him. And that's what it means to aim your life at his purposes. If you're charting your own course, if you're saying, Lord, here's what I'll do and here's what I won't do, if you're saying, Lord, I got it all outlined here, if you're not willing to pay the price of a little bit of embarrassment, if you're not willing to pay the price in humility of being defamed and dishonored by the world, if you're not willing to pay the price of a little less possessions in this life, then maybe you'll never know what it is to be content with his will at any price, and maybe you'll never really know what it is to grow spiritually because you'll not be aiming at his glory. It's when you are consumed with his glory and not your own comfort and not your own ease and not your own plans and your own will. So, if I am then to aim my life at his glory, no matter what it is, from eating and drinking to dying, it means I have to be content with that will no matter what it costs me. Secondly, if I aim my life at his glory, it means that his glory becomes so consuming that I hurt when he is dishonored. And this is a very important concept. I can usually tell when someone is aiming their life at the glory of God by how they react to God being dishonored. For example, David in Psalm 69:9 looked at the temple, and he looked at the worship of Israel, and his heart broke. He said this, "Zeal for thine house has eaten me up." In other words, David said, I have such a tremendous love for you and such a tremendous hatred for what dishonors you. I concern myself with your temple and your presence and your worship so that it literally tears me up. Then in the remainder of the verse he said this, the reproaches that fall on you fall on me. In other words, when you're dishonored, I hurt. And I'll tell you, I understand that a little bit as a father. You hurt my child, you hurt me. You hurt my wife, you hurt me. You hurt somebody I love, you hurt me. I've cried more in my life over things that have happened to other people I care about than I've ever cried about things that happened to me. In fact, it's pretty hard for me to cry about things that happen to me. It's much easier for me to cry with somebody whose heart is broken, for whom I care. And that's because I identify with them in love. And when you have identified with God, the things that break your heart will not be the things that happen to you, but the things that dishonor God. And that's the kind of mentality that really is saying, I am so focused on God's glory that what breaks his heart breaks my heart. And David said, zeal for your house has eaten me up, and the reproaches that fall on you fall on me. And you know who quoted that verse in the New Testament? Jesus did. Jesus said, zeal for your house has eaten me up. The reproaches that fall on you are fallen on me. And you know when he said it? He said it just before he made a whip in the temple. And when he made the whip, he started whipping people all through the temple. And he said, you've taken God's house, the place of his glory, and you've turned it into a den of thieves. And he rebuked them, and he blasted away at them with his whip, and he overturned their tables, and he chased them out. And he did it twice, once at the beginning of his ministry and once at the end. You see, he couldn't tolerate God being dishonored. That's the mark of someone who lives for God's glory.